addressing the validity of diagnoses, Innes and Litwack write, in a comprehensive research project, Nathan and his co-workers discovered that the diagnosis of psychosis generally was arrived at only when the examiner had recorded the presence of one or more of a small group of symptoms that are associated with psychosis. On the other hand, more specific diagnoses, such as paranoid schizophrenia or hysterical neurosis, were applied even when the examiner had not recorded evidence of one or more symptoms or behaviors supposedly associated with that specific diagnosis. In short, most specific diagnoses do not accurately describe even those symptoms perceived by the examiner, to say nothing of the actual symptoms exhibited by the patient. On the basis of an exhaustive review of the research literature, Frank observed that, save for perhaps the grossest kind of psychotic behavior, there were few, if any, correlations between diagnoses and patterns of behavior. He concluded that these data seem to point to the lack of validity of this mode of classifying behavior and question the usefulness of diagnosis. Another authority, after noting that many clinicians are unable to make better-than-chance judgments, concludes that we can no longer take for granted the validity of any clinician's judgment. Concerning the validity of psychiatric perceptions of dangerousness, the authors write, in early 1969, Dershowitz reviewed the few studies in the literature on the prediction of antisocial conduct and concluded that psychiatrists are rather inaccurate predictors. Inaccurate in an absolute sense. It seems that psychiatrists are particularly prone to one type of error, overprediction. They tend to predict antisocial conduct in many instances where it would not, in fact, occur. Indeed, our research suggests that for every correct psychiatric prediction of violence, there are numerous erroneous predictions. One psychiatrist has noted that there is no empirical support for the belief that psychiatrists can predict dangerous behavior. To the contrary, even with the most careful, painstaking, laborious, and lengthy clinical approach to the prediction of dangerousness, false positives may be at a minimum of 60 to 70%. In other words, even under controlled conditions, at least 60 to 70% of the people whom psychiatrists judge to be dangerous may in fact be harmless. Similarly, another psychiatrist acknowledges that psychiatrists cannot predict with even reasonable certainty that an individual will be dangerous to himself or others. Citing Monahan, of those predicted to be dangerous, between 65% and 95% are false positives. People who will not, in fact, commit a dangerous act. Finally, there is no support in the literature for the popularly held notion that the mentally ill are more dangerous as a group than the general population, or for any belief that the presence of a psychiatric disturbance per se makes the prediction of violence easier and more accurate than would otherwise be the case. Writing in 1972, Murphy concluded that prediction of the infrequent event of suicide is poor. The development of predictive tools of high accuracy has not yet been achieved, not even for populations with high risk of suicide, of which suicide attempters are but one example. Suicide is not as infrequent today as in 1972, but the point stands. An even more recent and comprehensive review of the literature by Greenberg concludes that a method for distinguishing persons who will suicide from those who will not, with a measure of accuracy sufficiently high to permit its use in psychiatric commitments, simply does not exist at present.